squares and square roots. This is basically the first activity in the grade 8 activity manual. For this activity, we'll be using thin square tiles. So we have thin square tiles in this box, which are basically thin square tiles of many different colors. We also will be using the hundreds board for the purpose of this activity. And if you see, this is activity number 1 in the grade 8 activity manual. The first page tells you how to go about doing this activity with your students. And then there are a couple of pages of observation sheets which we want the students to fill up as they do this activity. Activity itself is very simple. Students will be using these thin square tiles and forming squares of different sides. So if I just use the side 1, that's the square of side 1. What if I want to form a square of side 2? So let's take a few examples and see how to go about doing this activity. So let's take some examples. See, for example, the first square number is the square of side 1. So we place one tile here. Then we need to form a square of side 2. So we use 2 tiles and see how we can arrange that in the form of a square. We use 4 tiles and arrange them in the form of a square such that the square has a side of 2. So here we have two tiles in each side and it forms a square of side 4. What if we have 3 squares on each side? So we use more tiles and try to form squares of increasing dimensions. So when we are arranging 3 tiles in each row, then they can see that it will basically use 9 tiles to create a square of side 3, right? So that's a square of side 1, square of side 2, and then we have a square of side 3, right? Now the students can continue making more such squares, so they can make squares of side 4. In that case, they will see that there are 16 tiles in that. And what we want them to appreciate is basically the number of tiles that we use. That's the square of the side length. Basically, if we have 2 squares in each side of the square, then the number of squares that we have is 4. So 2 square, we call it as 4. When we use 3 squares on each side, 3 tiles on each side, then basically the square that is formed by that gives 9. So we say that 3 square is 9. Similarly, when we do 4 square, it gives 16, and 5 square is 25. So for each of these numbers, when we multiply by the same number, we get the square of that number. If we go the other way, if we take 9 tiles and if we want to see what number was multiplied, we call that as a root of that number. So to get 9 tiles, we had to multiply 3 into 3. So we call 3 and 3 as the root of the square root, right? So we place different number of tiles, and then there are questions in the observation sheet. Like for example, when the students are doing this particular activity, they are going to be creating different sized squares and then writing down the number of tiles that was used to create the larger square. So this number that was used, that denotes the number of tiles in each side, that's the square root of each of these numbers, and this number is the square of each of these square roots. So that that relationship we want the students to understand. And then once they are done with that, there are some more questions in the back. So here the questions are such that the square of the number 5 is what? So they need to take 5 tiles. They need to take 5 tiles, place it on one side of the square. So if I use 5 tiles on one side of the square, I can place 5 tiles like this. That's just the side of the square. So I need to form a square. So I need to fill up this entire gap and count the total number of squares. In this case, it's going to be 25, right? So square of the number 5 is going to be 25. Similarly, the square root of 81. So in this case, they will have to basically take 81 tiles and arrange it in a square form, right? And they should see that the square formed has 9 side of length 9. Right? So 9 into 9 gives us 81. The square root of 81 is 9. So such things we want the students to practically model it with these thin square tiles and understand the meaning of squares and why we call the roots of those squares to be square roots. And basically it's another fun activity. I really hope you enjoy this with your students. Thank you.